Hey guys, in the previous video, we got our route set up and we got our messages for the get, post, delete, and put requests to print correctly, but we still haven't connected our database to this application. And in this video, we are going to get that database connected. For that, we're going to create the schema first, then connect to it. Then we're going to add some student objects and we're going to make some update on those student objects. So first, let's make a database schema, and we're using MongoDB for this because MongoDB is very easy to work with using Node and Express. So I'm going to copy and paste some code here in order to keep this video short. So first we import Mongoose and we create a schema, and let's call it student schema, and it's going to hold some items such as name, email, major, year, GPA, and creation date for a student. So we specify the type of our item. So our name is a string, our GPA is a number, and our creation date is a date. And there are other data types available in MongoDB, and I'll post in a link in the description to see all those data types. So a required field means that the user has to enter this field for a object to be added, and if it is not required, then we can leave those blank. And we can also see in the creation date that we have a default field, and this means that the user doesn't have to type in the date. The database will automatically find the current time and put that in here. So that is our database schema, and let's set up our connection between the API and our database schema. For that, let's go to our index.js file, and we are going to have to add some code here. So what we're doing here is again importing Mongoose or MongoDB, and we're importing body parser, which is for the JSON objects. And we are connecting our API and MongoDB through this line here. And let's just call this student DB. And there are some fields here to avoid any errors. And we are also using URL encoding, and I will go over this a bit later. So now we have our schema and now we have our connection, but we still don't have any student objects in our database. So first we need to create students in our database, and for that we have to use a post request. Remember, post is to create. So let's go to our REST con and let's make a function called add student. And what we do here is we import Mongoose again, then we import the schema that we just created in our REST model. So our REST model is holding the schema called student schema, and we import that here. And then we make a student object, and this will be of the student schema type. And we make a new function called add student. And for that, the data we're getting is in the request body, and we parse that using JSON, and we pass that as a response here. And if there is an error, we send an error. So let's go to our REST route. So we need our get request to make use of this not the get request. We need our post request to make use of this add student function. So for that, we are going to have to import this function in here. So let's import that in here. And you will see that it has some extra fields that we don't need right now. So we just need the add student at the moment. So in our post request, we need to make use of that add student function. And let's do that here. Add student, which is good. And let's run our application, make sure everything is correct. And we can see that there are no errors. So now let's go to Postman. And in Postman, we have to type in our URL, which is localhost 4000 student, and our request will be post, since we're posting a new student. And let's say we are typing some key value here, and imagine this as a form that the user would have to type. So for their name, let's say they type John Doe. And you can see that this name is being shown on the URL here. So this is not very secure way to do this, passing our name into parameters. And this is why we have to use the URL encoded option I was talking about before. And let me show you that real quick, if I can find it here. And that was this right here. We use URL encoded too. So key value pair, I have filled out some information here: name, email, major, and year. And we can also type the GPA here, which, let's say this is a very good student, gets a 4.0, and we send that request in. And we will see that the user was added successfully, and their name, major, creation date was successfully created. And now that we have our post requests all set up, let's also set up other types of requests. And one of them will be the GET request to get all the students. And one of them will be to get a specific student, and others will be to delete a student and put or update a student. So let's go to our RESTcon file. And in here, we are going to have to add all those other functions that I just mentioned. So we can see those functions here. So we have a function called getStudents, which will be used to find all the students. And you can see that code here, very similar to before, but now we need to find on our student database. Remember, student holds the schema, and same as before, send any errors or pass the whole students. And we also have our get student by ID, and this is where we find a specific student. So we use find by ID, which is a predefined method, and we pass in a student ID. And if there's an error, we send error, or we pass that student. And we also have the update student by ID. So we used a find and update, and we send in the student ID, and we tell MongoDB to return the new updated object. And in everything goes well, we pass in the JSON object. And we also have a delete student by ID, and we use a remove method here, which is predefined, and we pass in the student ID. And because the student will no longer exist, we can't pass the student anymore. So we're just going to pass a message saying, hey, this student you just mentioned is deleted. So now we need to import all those methods that we just created in here. And let me get all of those. So those are the methods we created, and we also need to have the right methods in the let's say the GET request. We need to make a get students in get students call. So I'll just do that quickly here. So our get has all the get student, our post has our add student, and this get is to get by a specific ID. You can see that the URL changed here from before, and now we need a specific ID that either we're going to get that student or delete that student, or we're going to update that student. So let's run this one more time. Let's save everything and run it. And it's telling me there's an error. It's because the file name is wrong here. So okay, everything went through correctly, and our database and our application is running. So this is our push request. So let's add some dummy data here. Let's call the person Jane Doe. And this is just me adding some random data here. So we have more than one student in the database. Because next we're going to make a GET request. So in the GET request, we don't need any key value pairs because we're not updating anything. We're just getting all the students. So let's select none here and let's send that in. So we can see here that we get all the students that we added. John Doe was the first person we added, Jane Doe, and so on. So this means our GET and push requests are working correctly. And we also want to test getting a student just by their ID. So this is the ID value that was auto-generated. And we need to pass this in the URL here. So let's send that in. And you can see that our getStudentById method is also working because we get a student by their specific ID. So let's try something else. Let's try to update a student. So before we have John Doe here, let's change the name to John and also change the email to just John. And let's send that in, and we can see that the update went through. And just to verify that it went through, let's go to our get method and send that in. So the information was updated correctly. And let's also delete a student. So let's say we want to delete the John student, and for that we would have to make a delete request. The parameter will be none. Let's send that in. The student was deleted successfully. So all our get, post, put, and delete methods are working correctly. And just to make sure, let's call all these students in the database. And you can see John no longer exists. We just have Jane and the other person we added. So that concludes this video because our API is working correctly. And thank you for watching.